We have to redo that.
Yes.
Senator Kunish renews her motion for Senate File 4107 to pass as amended to higher education. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Senator, for that lively debate.
To testify. I'm going to begin the day with a bill that I'll be presenting, Senate File 4107. So members and chair, I am really proud to author this version of the Increased Teachers of Color Act. As we know, there is a unwieldy shortage of teachers in our school districts, especially teachers of color.
Last year, Pellsby awarded $3.4 million to grantees, which went to support nearly 6,000 teachers across the state. That said, over $9 million was requested. We've seen district utilize these funds to support and sustain Minnesota's educators during what is arguably one of the hardest times teachers have faced in recent years. Now more than ever, it is essential that we invest in ways to retain our teachers and show them that they matter.
So I guess my next question is, you know, with the accessibility of the funds, if my children were to decide to go to college to become teachers, would they be eligible for this funding?
The eligibility criteria are listed starting on page.
Mr. Chair, we'll stop wasting time. My children are white. Would my children qualify?
Mr. Chair, Senator, not under this scholarship program for aspiring teachers of color.
So to be clear, because of the color of their skin, my children would be discriminated against in this program?
Senator Farnsworth, it's more than just the color of somebody's skin. It's the cultural, it's the life experiences, it's the connections that they make through language, through all of those things that make a difference. It's not just about the color of your skin.
And I think I disagree. I think that that's exactly what this is. The Minnesota Human Rights Act says it is the public policy of this state to secure for persons in this state freedom from discrimination. I'm going to skip parts 1 through 4. Part 5 says in education, because of race, color, creed, religion, national origin, sex, gender identity, marital status, disability status with regard to public assistance, sexual orientation, and age. So it is the policy of the state to not discriminate in education based on race, but it is kind of becoming the policy of this state to discriminate based on race. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm really disappointed at sort of the intentional misunderstanding about who has and has not been represented. What we do know as a fact is that for decades, centuries, that there are communities that have been specifically excluded. We've heard from students over and over again, our BIPOC students, who come here and who talk to us and say, it's really important for me to have a teacher that looks like me and that understands my experience. And it just defies my understanding that anyone would be opposed to us trying to expand our base of teachers to include people from every background to help support our students in their learning. It just defies understanding. And this notion of white people being discriminated against, it is offensive. It is offensive, Senator. We have plenty of white folks teaching. What we don't have are a lot of people of color teaching, and that's important. Giving lip service to diversity, equity, and inclusion does not matter when we don't actually provide support for people to be successful in the profession.
You've already testified as to which racial and ethnic groups this does not cover, to Senator Farnsworth's question, but are there any other racial or ethnic groups that categorically this scholarship program does not cover other than white people?
Mr. Chair and Senator, there are people who do identify as white, but also identify as African American, Native American, Latino. In other words, people have multiracial identities, and those folks are under the umbrella of people of color and American Indians who would qualify for this. So people who only identify as white or are identified as white are not eligible in this.
At what point, what percentage does an individual have to be of a underrepresented racial or ethnic group in order to qualify to be an applicant in this program?
Mr. Chair and Senator, that is not defined in the proposed statute.
Yeah, and I didn't see it either. And to me, that's a problem. I mean, we're making law. It's kind of a pretty loose definition. It would seem to me if we're going to make a scholarship based upon race, we should do a better job at defining what that is and who qualifies and who doesn't qualify. But that's a comment, not a question. My next question is...
If I could make Senator Cruin, are you
Sure, yeah,
suggesting
go
we go back to quantum and quantum for every race? Is that what you're suggesting here?
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Kunesh, no, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting it's your bill, not mine. I'm not suggesting any of this.
I think you are.
I'm absolutely not. I'm just trying to understand what the intent of the bill is. And to me, we have a ambiguous definition that could be interpreted different ways. And I'm just trying to understand what the intent of the bill is. So in June of last year, the U.S. Supreme Court in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard College ruled that affirmative action in admissions is unconstitutional. And I'm assuming you heard about that case. And so I started thinking, well, that case is about admissions. It's not specifically about racially exclusive scholarships. The language used by the court in that case was much broader and will likely apply at least to some respect to racial exclusive scholarships and grants. So in light of the new Supreme Court case, was there any analysis or thought by the proponents of this bill, Mr. Spees, you in particular, whether this bill is constitutional?
We have not seen that it's the Supreme Court ruling about admissions is the same as a ruling about awards of scholarships that come from particularly state statute.
If you could help me understand, how do you rectify, or how does one rectify the policy of the state to prohibit discrimination based on color, but then to have a program which explicitly is discriminating based on color?
I think it's really important to remember that we provide scholarships and grants and opportunity for a number of unique subsets of teachers. We have scholarships and grants and support for special ed teachers. We have scholarships and grants for EL teachers. We have all kinds of different opportunities for unique groups of people. And I think that as we look at this one, as we look at increasing teachers of color and Indigenous, we are looking at a unique subgroup that are going to help support our students. And that's what we do as educators, and that's what we're doing with legislation. So while this might not be a grant or a scholarship that another person might be eligible for, we do provide other sources of support in other ways.
Well, disability is not discriminating, or is not a color. Disability is not a race. English as a second language is not a color. It's not a race. It defines my understanding how we could be putting forth a program, a policy that is going to explicitly discriminate based on color. Now, there is a history in this country that is terrible, a dark time. But we can't have policy in our day that advocates for the continuation of discrimination.
you know, if it wasn't such a serious topic, I would maybe laugh at the fact that we have like white male senators in this room or complaining about having a lack of representation in places of power. Just wild. But I just want to say that, you know, white men again, and this is not again, I'm not trying to exclude a certain group, but it just keeps coming up, and I think it's crazy that these are not just tough conversations. These are saying some incredibly offensive things, but there's most amount of leadership positions in our government. They own the most amount of businesses in our state. They hold the most amount of money in our country. They're fine. They're represented just fine. So I just want to, since we're clearing things up, I just do have a really quick question. If we are asking the state of Minnesota to spend more money to recruiting teachers, do you want the state of Minnesota to spend more money recruiting white teachers? And if the answer is no, then what is your plan to address the very significant gap in teachers of color versus white teachers in our classroom? What is that plan? And I hear the word discrimination being thrown around, but I would really like to know, we have a very big gap between teachers of color and white teachers. What would you like to do to close that gap? And what do you think Minnesota should be spending money on?
Senator Gustafson's willing to answer, because I'd like to clear things up. Could she, if she's willing to answer, could you explain who were you referring to on this committee in terms of senators who are white?
Senator Lucero, Senator Farnsworth, Senator Cruen, Senator Rarick. Does that answer your question?
So in these conversations, and regardless of what one's skin color is, whether it be Senator Rarick, Senator Cruen, Senator Farnsworth, or anybody else, discrimination is evil. And discrimination is not rectified with further discrimination. The dark history of discrimination, which is a reality of this country's past, is not solved by discriminating today. And those on this committee who are expressing concern, regardless of their skin color, are as important as any other voice. I myself, being a minority, look at the comments of all of my colleagues with a colorblind lens because I value the opinions and perspectives of everybody. And I think, Mr. Chair, that all on this committee should be able to express those opinions without others on this committee having negative remarks and somehow marginalizing their comments. I long for the day when we can have productive conversations on important policy to benefit all of Minnesota without instilling further discrimination and racism.
When we look at the deficiencies for decades and decades into our educational system, but also into our diverse teaching staff, this is one way to make sure to help not only the students have better achievement and feel like they have a place in their schools and in their communities by seeing other folks that look like them, that talk like them, that have those same life experiences. That affirmation is going to help all students. So while we are trying to increase the diversity of our teachers, the ultimate goal is to increase the skills, the learning, the empathy, the democracy of our students as we go forward, recognizing that those will be our next leaders. And unfortunately, so many communities of color have been left out. And it's actually really sad that we have to do something like this, where we're proposing to put unique dollars to support communities of color. But it's because they've been left out for so long and they haven't had those opportunities. And that's what this bill and the whole comprehensive increasing teachers of color and Indigenous is all about. So while it might not apply to folks that are not Indigenous or folks of color, there's so many other opportunities out there that to begrudge something like this is just really heartbreaking.